When you go through what people call the loss of a child, a parent's worst nightmare, I always say that there's no neutrality. You don't just stay the same. And you can go either one. You can go in either direction. You can go into a state of despair, and I've certainly seen people go into a state of despair that they never recover from. Maybe they reject God, they grow bitter with Him, or you can go in another direction where you say, "We're going to make every moment count," because we saw the brevity of life right before our eyes. And by God's grace, God has allowed us. He's given us the grace and the stamina and the endurance to go in the other direction. That we've been able to say, let's make every moment count. Let's make every moment count with our children, with our church, with what we've been called to do in the nation.
Hello and welcome to Along the Way Life's Journey. I'm your host, Carl Buccellato. For many, many months, I've been talking to you about the events that have been happening in America and how more and more people are coming back to faith. And I think that's an essential part of our future, because this nation surely has had its glitches in the past. I have with me today a man as my guest that I know you're going to enjoy. He's the senior pastor of Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, Robe, Dr. Rob Pacienza. And he is, I think, a shining light in and of himself. And he's my pastor. I'll be transparent with you. He's my pastor. Pastor Rob, thank you for joining our show today.
Carl, it's a privilege to be on.
You're really, I have said that not tongue in cheek. I really believe that. I've come to appreciate who you are, not only as a spiritual leader, but who you are as a mentor for this community and outreach that you do. I'm so aware of what's happening politically and sociologically in this community and in this world that we live in, and how it's important for us as a community of faith to be present to people. And now I'm just going to let you chat a little bit. What does that mean to you as a senior pastor of a church with 60 years worth of history that have been dominant in the marketplace? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, just briefly about my story. When I moved down to South Florida as a teenager, I was lost as can be. Religion, Christianity was the last thing on my mind, but a next door neighbor invited me to Coral Ridge. They knew I came from a broken home. They knew that I was lost, and they knew that I needed to hear the hope of the gospel. And right then and there at Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, I committed my life to Christ. Our founding pastor, D. James Kennedy, not only became my spiritual father, he became my mentor, and he really poured into me throughout my high school and college age years, was instrumental in being used to really give me a vision and a passion for the ministry that you just described, Carl, a ministry that just doesn't talk about religion and faith in a private sense, but how does it affect all areas of life? How do we see all of the world, all of creation, business and politics and government and work and family, all through the lens of our faith? I think that's an important thing. And so very much what we're doing today is a result of the mentoring, discipleship that I received as a teenager right here in the church that I'm now pastoring. And I think today in the 21st century, what a moment to be alive. What a moment to really lean into what I often call this cultural moment and see the church as the answer to bring real hope, real answers to a world that is fractured, a nation in particular that is polarized and divided. And I think this is exactly what we need to be doing. But we certainly have history on our side, Carl. When you look at the church over the last 2,000 years, we have always been at our best when we leaned into what was happening in the culture, when we leaned into the darkness, the brokenness, and said, politics will fail you, people will fail you, systems will fail you, but there's a God who created the heavens and the earth that has a plan for your life, but also has a plan for this nature, for this nation, and for our culture. And so I'm absolutely delighted to be a pastor in Fort Lauderdale, particularly now in the 21st century.
Absolutely. It's ironic. Just this morning, I watched an old sermon by Dr. Kennedy, which he delivered in the early 1990s. And he was telling us then about this whole woke thing that was coming and how important it was for us to stand our place and not give in and be present to the world. Because and you're fulfilling that mission. You are here now in the 21st century, living out everything that he predicted in the 20th century. And we have a battle on our hands. There's no doubt about it. But the good news is we're winning. And if we read our book, we know we win in the end.
Absolutely. That's our ultimate hope. And so that
Yeah.
all the more reason to get out there and tell everybody about it.
Absolutely.
We have a message of victory, a message of hope, to allow us to endure the pains and the trials and the sufferings of this current world. But why would we not want to tell the entire world? Why would we not want to tell everybody in our neighborhoods and our communities that there is a way to have utter assurance and hope beyond all hope in the person and work of Jesus Christ?
Absolutely. The only way, the only one way. Everybody talks about all these other routes that they have and everything. They're so deceived. They really don't even know how deceived they are. They don't understand the truth. That's why it's up to us to tell them the truth and get them to understand it better. So we have now a church that they're the head of that are very strong, very growing and leaps and bounds with the young families coming in. I was so appreciative the other Sunday or Sunday before to sit there and watch you bring in all those new members, 60 some odd new members, and lots of young families, young children. And that's what we need to do for communities like this all across America. Make sure that young people are rooted into the word and rooted into the community of church people, because that's the future. If it isn't for those children, we have no future. And it's up to us to be a lot older than you, but it's up to all of us to give that kind of direction and that kind of hope to young people, because if they don't find the right way, we have no future as a human race.
Absolutely.
They have to find a way.
We have to pass it down to the next generation. And I think if you allow me to say something that might be seen as a little controversial, but
oh, I love it. I love controversy.
I'll tell you who does this incredibly well, passing it down to the next generation. It's the Muslims. And many people in the East, even the Chinese, they think in generations. We often think in the West, because we're moving at such a rapid pace. We think in quarters, we think in decades. They think in generations, and kudos to them. And that's why they're thinking about how do our ideologies and our values and our stories and traditions get passed down from generation to generation. But here's the reality. This isn't an Eastern tradition. It's not an Islamic tradition. This is a biblical tradition. You see all throughout the Old Testament, families passing down stories and values and traditions to their children and their children's children. I think that's why we've been losing for so long here in America, and particularly in the church. We've lost that vision of passing down our traditions and our values and the stories of what God has done and what God has done in this nation in particular, the greatest nation in the world. We failed to pass that down to the next generation. And I think we've got to reclaim that and recapture that, not just as an American ideal, but as an ideal of God's people that is seen all throughout redemptive history.
Absolutely. In the 20th century, we aspired for more for our children and the generations to come. We came out of that oppressive war and the depression, and we decided we're going to give them more than we had. And unfortunately, that in a sense was a good thing, because it was overdone. We lost the reverence for the older generations. Young people do not have grandfathers' knees to sit at any longer because they don't revere them. And so as a result of that, they don't hear these stories. They're not passed down word of mouth like they used to be. Sadly, I see that in my own family, that I can remember learning so much from my grandparents and my uncles and my aunts, in addition to my parents. And it was part of a big culture. Well, you understand, I was born and raised in New York. I was part of an Italian-American family. That means we were a mass of people that got together for Sundays. We broke bread together, but we shared each other's lives and we shared wisdoms with one another. That seems to be lost. That's what we have to bring back to young people, because they don't know what they lost. They really don't know what they missed.
Carl, as you're talking about that, you're making me hungry. I'm sure you had some good Sunday gravy on Sunday evenings. The best. But you're absolutely right, Carl. And that's what I love about what God's doing at Coral Ridge. You mentioned all the young families in the new members classes, but we also have plenty of senior adults, and we have little children. Now, anytime anybody asks me, what's Coral Ridge made up of? Is it older people? Is it young people, teenagers, whatever? And I say, yes, to all the
Yes,
above.
yes,
And that's what I love
yes.
doing. It's this intergenerational picture of what God is doing. But I think it's a beautiful picture of the family of God, generation to generation, where the older people are mentoring and pouring into the younger families. We have older, wiser entrepreneurs that are working with some of our emerging leaders in our church. We have grandparents that are working in our children's ministry and pouring into the children and to their parents. So it's a beautiful picture of what God's doing. But we got to get back to that in America. We got to get back to that in our culture. This idea
Absolutely.
of intergenerational relationships and
Absolutely.
worship and community. Because that's really the soul of a healthy society.
And let's face it, that whole woke culture failed our kids so badly, and so many of us sit back and let it happen because we didn't realize that while we were focusing on the presidential elections, the real power was being lost on the local level, at the school levels, and the local administrations who took command of the schools and what they were teaching our children. Not at your school, because you have Christian values in your school. I'm talking about public schools. It was a very sad thing what happened in this country. And they people know it today. They know they've been fooled. They know something's missing. And they're coming back in droves. Since Charlie Kirk's assassination, I read somewhere, hundreds of thousands of young people have come back to faith. Programs for faith have opened in every campus across the United States. How wonderful is that? And I know you guys are deeply involved with supporting that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, Carl. I actually just yesterday I was speaking at a Turning Point conference in Dallas, and the place was packed, and it was packed with young pastors that are hungry to learn how do I teach and preach boldly? How do I stand up for what is right? And what a lot of people don't realize, that's how this country was founded. This country wasn't founded in 1776. It was actually founded back in the 1730s with the Great Awakening.
That's right.
Bold biblical preachers that were preaching the hard truths of Scripture, but then applying it to what was happening in their cultural moment in colonial America. We got to get back to that in America. And so I just was at this Turning Point conference, and I left so encouraged. You had young pastors traveling from all around the country, about 1,000 pastors that said, how do I do this? How do I do this in my churches? How do I bring back this mindset and this vision that Charlie Kirk had for pastors and churches in America? How do we keep the dream alive? How do we keep this vision alive? And so I think you're seeing young people return to the church. You're seeing young pastors that are saying, enough. I'm no longer going to be silent. I've been told for way too long that I got to keep my politics to myself. I got to keep my cultural convictions to myself. And the reality is the people are sitting in the pews going, they're living in this world every single day. They want to hear from their pastor.
Absolutely.
They want to hear is their
not
perspective.
Only want to, they need to. They need the direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I know that for me, the real heroes of the pre-revolutionary time in America, what was the colonies before the United States, were the men of the black robes. We've talked about that before. They were the real heroes. They went out there and they put their lives on the line, telling people, awareness, come away from this servitude that we've been living under this king. And I hope these young pastors know about the black robes and realize how much of their lives they gave up for the future of America.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up the Black Robe Regiment, because that's unfortunately a lesson in history that's been almost forgotten. And what a lot of people don't understand, that was actually started as a pejorative. It was a derogatory term. It was from King George III in England. It said it's all those black robes that are leading to that revolution, but it became a badge of honor. But that's case in point of how much influence the clergy had in colonial America, that even King George III in England was saying, this revolution is a result of the black robes. It's a result of the clergy. It was the result of preachers. And you're absolutely right. We need a 21st century Black Robe Regiment. We're actually, I can't say too much, but we're on the ground floor of creating something along with Turning Point that we're hopefully going to be able to announce in the fall. We're going to be soon announcing a Black Robe Regiment for the 21st century, started here at Coral Ridge.
That's just what we need.
Yeah.
In the military, they have what's called special forces. They take people out of the mainstay military. They give them special training and tactics, and they equip them. And that's what we need in faith as well. We need the special forces group. Those black robe guys are going to be the special forces of the Christian faith in America, and bring us back to that strength that we use as a group, as a people. I know sometimes I get a little political about it, but I think, what is politics after all, other than supposedly people serving and representing the people? And they've lost that. They forgot that. They think they're the leaders. They're not the leaders. They're supposed to be the servants, the leaders.
And
But
the reality
black
is politics, all legislation is going to be shaped by an individual, by a group, and by someone else's morality. And for 60
That's right.
years in this nation, give or take, the Christians have bought the lie. We don't need to get involved in politics. We don't need to get involved in legislation. And we've let the seculars, we've let the Marxists shape legislation and politics in this country for almost 6 decades now. And we saw what happened in 2020. We almost lost this nation.
Right. That's right.
And it's time that Christians wake up and say, would we rather want a secular humanist or a cultural Marxist shaping our politics, or do we want men and women who believe in the Judeo-Christian worldview and foundations that this nation was founded upon? So we need Christians running for office. We need Christians showing up to their city council meetings. We need Christians that are voting, and we need Christians that are standing up and advocating for legislation that represents God and his values.
Right. And before they can do that, we have to realize that we've now assumed that there are as many as 10 million unregistered voters voting in the United States. And that's what the Save America Act is about. But I've seen speculation that there are as many as 20 million Christians who never registered to vote.
I know. So you think about that.
Our job is to make them aware that they've got to get up and vote, and they can't vote if they don't register.
Yeah, you think about that gap, all of the unregistered illegal individuals that are voting, and all the millions upon millions of evangelicals that are not voting. Can you imagine if we fix the illegal issue with the Save America Act? I hope our leaders in Congress wake up to what's at stake. And then the 25 million evangelicals, even if we got a percentage of them to vote, we would transform this nation.
Absolutely. And you would never see the stronghold of the Marxists and the socialists that has happened over the last 2 decades. You'd never see that happen again, because evangelicals recognize that they have to follow God's will and God's direction. And that is not mutilating children's sexuality, and it is not all these gay pride flags and all the nonsense that they allow to happen under that previous administrations. They would never allow that with Christians in power.
Of course not.
No. So I've gone astray a little bit. You were beginning to tell us about your early days as a young man and coming to the church and finding faith. I know you found a beautiful wife as well, and you have a lovely family. Would you like to chat a little bit about your family and some of the things that keep Ron going?
Absolutely. Well, I married my high school sweetheart. Her name is Jennifer. When I came to faith at Coral Ridge, I entered their school, Westminster Academy, the following year. And Jen was my orientation leader, and it was love at first sight. Now, she didn't know much. She was a little skeptical at first. Who's this Yankee coming down from Philadelphia? So she kind of played hard to get for about 6 months, but eventually we got together, dated all throughout high school and college. I mentioned that because your audience needs to know that she grew up here as well. So we are both sons and daughters of Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church and Westminster Academy. Grew up here, discipled here, empowered and mentored here as well. We went off to Samford University. It's a Baptist college in Birmingham, Alabama. And after, as much as we loved Birmingham, we were ready to come home to South Florida. So we came home after 4 years at college, and was called, worked at several other churches right after college, and was called to be the senior pastor, the third senior pastor of Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church in 2016. So that means that this year is 10 years, a decade as senior pastor of Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church. We have 3 children. My oldest is Preston. He's 15 years old. he is all boy. He loves sports. He loves getting after it. So we really enjoy watching him grow and mature. I have a daughter who's 13, Lydia, who's actually named after the Lydia in the Bible. So because we always knew she'd be a mover and a shaker. And we have, and my youngest daughter, Lily, she went to be with the Lord 7 years ago. And she was 3 years old. It was born with an immune disorder. We were told by doctors that she would grow out of it, but the Lord chose to bring her home early. But we believe in the providence of God, so it was neither late nor early. We believe it was in God's perfect timing. Certainly early for us as a mother and a father, but God has certainly used that tragedy in our lives, as you can only imagine. It was through her death, Lily's death, that my other two children found faith and they came to know the Lord. It has transformed my preaching, my ministry, given me a spirit of empathy that I did not have, truth be told, before. And I think it also gave my wife and I, Jen, a sense of urgency. You know, when you go through what people call the loss of a child, a parent's worst nightmare, I always say that there's no neutrality. You don't just stay the same. And you can go you can go in either direction. You can go into a state of despair. And I've certainly seen people go into a state of despair that they never recover from. Maybe they reject God, they grow bitter with him. Or you can go in another direction where you say, we're going to make every moment count because we saw the brevity of life right before our eyes. And by God's grace, God has allowed us, he's given us the grace and the stamina and the endurance to go in the other direction, that we've been able to say, let's make every moment count. Let's make every moment count with our children, with our church, with what we've been called to do in the nation. It's given us what my father used to call a fire in the belly. Kind of this sense of let's do what matters, and let's do what matters for all of eternity. And so that's our testimony, bringing but really that really is the testimony of God. That's what God does. He brings, as the scriptures say, beauty out of ashes. He brings life out of death. And God, it doesn't mean the grief ever goes away, but God, through his grace,
you'll always feel it.
Yeah, but he's sustained us and he's walked us through that valley, as the psalmist tells us he promises to do.
And your sensitivity to people and your awareness of that reality, that every moment is precious, showed through this week when you baptized a bunch of people. But I saw you on your knee baptizing this little boy, and as you touched his head and you said, may you grow to a full life as a man, I saw the emotion on your face.
I got choked up there.
I saw it, and I so loved it. I said, this is the man who really believes and he really loves this child.
Yeah.
It
I sure
touched
do.
my heart.
That's
It really
awesome.
did. Thank you for that.
Of course.
So we are coming upon a time in this country where we have to rally people to stand up, as we spoke about a few moments ago. We have to rally people to not only be more involved politically and with their grandchildren and children, but to recognize that emotion that you and I just shared a moment ago about how important every day is, every moment is, and how do we as human beings reach out one to another. You know, somebody told me a long time ago, I was this hardcore kid from Brooklyn, tough kid, street kid, the whole thing. And before I really came to know the Lord, people, you used to seek out, how are you going to change the world? How are you going to change the world? And one man said to me one day, you only change the world by one hand reaching out and touching another. That's how you change the world. You get to realize that we're human, that we need each other. And then from there, to hear the word of Christ. But first, you got to know that somebody cares about them, that someone is there. And I see that in what you did Sunday. And I think that's so important. We have to get more people to recognize to do that. And I watched a few of your shows. Webby's been telling me there's a great podcast program called City of God. And he's on there. It's weekly, isn't it?
Every single week. You can go to crm.tv to find all the podcast episodes.
And you must watch it. All the credentials that Out of Reach, Pastor Rob, are going to be in the show notes. You're going to know how to reach him through the church and the city of God and the programs that he's doing with. You'll find places where you can reach out and comment to him or thank him or just write a question. I'm sure he'd be glad to answer. But it's important for us as human people to recognize that we're not alone. Now, this great God of ours has given us forever eternity. If we give our souls to him and we accept Jesus as our Savior, as both of us do, we know that we have life in heaven with him. But there are young people on this street, not some people that are not so young, that are suffering because they don't know. They struggle. And I know it's not you can answer on program. I know we can't collectively come to the wisdom of the ages and say this is the cure, but it starts with knowing Jesus Christ.
It does, and I think the beauty of knowing Jesus Christ, and I often say this in our services on Sunday, that God not only saves us to himself, but he saves us into a new community, into a new family. I actually just preached on it last Sunday. And that's one of the benefits and the blessings of being a part of a church, that yes, we get to worship God, but we get to worship God together in community with all of our brokenness and all of our failures, with all of our mistakes. We're blended into this broken but beautiful family, as I often say. That is the church. We often think of the church as just the four walls, the place you go to worship on Sunday morning, but it's so much more than that. And you're absolutely right, Carl. We need, in a world that is fractured and a nation that's divided, what a moment to be the church and to welcome people with open hands and open arms and say, be a part of what God's doing here. Be a part of a beautiful new community, a beautiful new family where you can be known, where you can be connected, where you can be celebrated and challenged and encouraged. And so I think one of the answers for our broken world has to be the church, because this is where you can find community and fellowship and friendship. There's a lot of loneliness up there. When you look at the statistics, you think of suicide rates at an all-time high. You think of mental illness at an all-time high. Yeah. You think of our nation in particular. We have more wealth in this nation than every nation combined throughout the history of the world. I mean, we have more wealth and more affluence, but at the same time, we've never been more lonely. We've never been more medicated. And so we've got to answer the question and say, politics has failed them. Thinking life is found in just your material possessions, ultimately, that's found them. Where else can we offer hope? We can offer hope through the Church of Jesus Christ.
So Pastor Rob asked the eternal question on Sunday. Am I my brother's keeper? And the answer was a resounding
yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's the beauty. The church is in the business of declaring to the world that the curse has been reversed, that there can be life and life eternal, that yes, we are our brother's keeper and our sister's keeper. That's the beauty of the fellowship of the people of God and the community that God is developing of people from every tongue, tribe, and nation.
Right. So if you had a clean palate and you have the opportunity to speak to all these millions of people that are probably not watching this show, but a handful of them, a few thousand. Now you have something that you could say, it's all yours. What do you want to tell our audience?
I think we're at a very pivotal moment in America. We've heard for over a decade now, make America great again. What a lot of people aren't talking about is what made it great in the first place.
Right.
And I think we'll never be able to make America great again if we really understand as Americans what made it great in the first place. And what made it great in the first place was men and women who loved God, men and women who understood that there is a God that created us in his image, that gave us unalienable rights, that our rights and freedoms don't come from the government, they don't come from man. Because if our rights come from government, then government can simply take them away. And they'd have every right to do it. But our government doesn't give us our rights. Our government is in place to protect those rights, to ensure that those unalienable rights are never taken away from us, we the people. So I would encourage every single person, young and old, that is listening to this program, regardless of where you are spiritually, if you love America, if you love the the traditions and the heritage and the flourishing that has happened in this nation for the last 250 years, and you're concerned about it lasting for another 250 years, we must ask the question, what made America great in the first place? Know our history, understand our founding, read the Declaration of Independence. Go out and watch a movie that I just took my family to, A Great Awakening. It's a story of
Absolutely
Ben
wonderful
Franklin
movie.
and George Whitefield, the great leader of the Great Awakening. You will learn so much about the spiritual and religious roots of America. I'm not asking for everybody to fall in line with all of our faith traditions. If you want to learn more about what Carl and I believe, come to Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church on a Sunday morning. But at the very least, don't buy the lie that America was founded as a secular nation. That's an
Right.
impossible reality to embrace when
Right.
you know the facts, when we know the history. And then once you know the history, commit yourself to passing it down to the next generation. They need to hear the stories of the revolution. They need to hear the stories of the Great Awakening. They need to hear stories of George Washington on his knees, pleading to the God of Providence, that the God of Providence would lead this new nation to be a city on a hill. Read the story of our Puritan fathers. I think you'll be blown away, and then take that story and tell it to others. That's how we preserve America for another 250 years.
Absolutely. You know, we have had the Marxists have control of our media for such a long time, and they've spit all these lies out about what it really was like, and there's no God, and that there was no Judeo-Christian foundation. So I even heard somebody say it was founded on Muslim principles. I can't imagine anyone thinking such a thing. But you know, you hear such nonsense. And when people are taught that over and over again from the school level and the media and the newsprint and everything else, and they don't hear anything to the contrary, therefore people fall into the abyss. They don't know that it's not true. We have to tell them the truth, that this is a nation founded under God, on that Judeo-Christian principles. And it has nothing at all to do with the Muslims or the deists or the people who said that we were only apes in the trees and things of that kind. And it's just not true.
Yeah, so I think three myths about America and religion. One being that the separation of church and state is somehow in the Constitution and should remove all Christian influence from the public square. I think myth number two, that you can't legislate morality. We know that that's a lie, because all legislation is shaped by someone's morality. The question is it a Marxist morality, or is it a Christian reality? And then third, that, as you just said, that America was founded as a secular nation and not a Christian nation. And I would be as bold to say, I think you would agree with me, Carl, not only what is the idea that America was founded as a Christian nation, our opinion, I would say that's actually factual. It is a fact that cannot be denied. When you actually study the history, when you actually study the founders, you will see that, yes, on the one hand, they did not desire a national church. They did not desire a tax-funded religion in America. They were certainly trying to get away from that in England, but it is undeniable that Christianity was the predominant worldview that shaped our founders, shaped our founding documents, and shaped the founding of the constitutional republic.
Absolutely. And it'll always be that way, but we have to make sure that people know the differences. Okay, so we're coming up on the 250th anniversary of the United States. Oh, what a wonderful, glorious thing. What are you planning at the church?
Yeah, we have a lot. Well, all year we've been launching an initiative and celebrating an initiative called Celebrate America. You can add this to the credentials as well, celebrateamerica.org. We bought the rights to that URL last year. On that website are all kinds of resources, documentaries, videos, books, all kinds of resources to help the Christian church in America celebrate the true story of America's Christian roots. So that's been something that we've been talking about a lot. A couple months ago, we had a patriotic concert called Celebrate America, where we honored our veterans. We had two individuals that fought in World War II, which is amazing. We get to celebrate them as the greatest generation. I actually, in just a few weeks, I've just been asked by the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, to be the co-chair of the National Day of Prayer. This will be a big one, with it being the National Day of Prayer up in Washington, D.C., and our nation's 250th anniversary. That will be on May 7th, and that will be live streamed at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can go to the National Day of Prayer website to find that. I've been asked to speak for 20 minutes to Congress on America's Christian founding. So pray for me on May 7th, National Day of Prayer. And then, of course, we pray by God's grace that we'll be up in Washington, D.C. for the July 4th festivities.
Fantastic. And ladies and gentlemen, he's a very humble guy. He's not telling you. He's also building a cultural center connected to his church of about 30,000 square feet to put his money where his mouth is, to bring conferences and conventions and prayer sessions and study groups, everything else to the community in Fort Lauderdale, but for the broad community, not only for Fort Lauderdale. And I applaud you for that. That's a terrific undertaking. Just wonderful. You know, I say all the time, ladies and gentlemen, tell your story. No one can tell it like you can. You must tell your story, because if you don't tell your story, it's lost. All the wisdom is gone. You have to join Pastor Rob and myself and be willing to speak out. Tell your families, write it down. Write your letters, send it into the news bureaus at the television networks or at the print network. Tell the story. It's essential for everyone to know. And I'm going to tell you one more thing that I say all the time on this program. It may sound blip, but I believe it. Get somebody you know today. Grab them in a bear hug. Tell them you love them. Tell them you love them. It may be the only time they hear those words. And I'm quite sure God loves them too. He loves me. He loves you. He certainly loves Pastor Rob here, because look at that man. I mean, how could he not love him? Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Any last statement you'd like to make?
No, I love that you're using this platform for the common good. Really appreciate getting to know you, Carl, and your lovely wife. Glad that God has brought you to our church, and privileged to partner with you in this great kingdom work.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this. All of your contact information for Pastor Rob will be in the show notes. Please comment. Please contact them. Tell them what your thoughts are. Tell them that you appreciate what they're doing. It's very important. Thank you all. God bless you all. Thank you so much for being on.